Welcome to Now Serving, a Side of Therapy, your intro guide into the therapeutic world. Together, we'll explore various aspects around how to show up for ourselves and others by tending to our own mental and emotional well-being. I'm your host, Dalton Huckabee, a licensed marriage and family therapist, and I'm grateful you've joined me. Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of Now Serving, a Side of Therapy, a client's intro guide into the therapeutic world. Today, we'll be talking about what are some things that people can consider or look for whenever they are looking to choose a therapist that is the right match for them. Today, we are joined by Yael Gonicman, who is the clinical director of ISO Marriage and Family Therapy. She is trained in art therapy and works with clients that have a background with some trauma. And not only that, she speaks English and Spanish, so she's bilingual. Welcome to this week's episode, Yale.
Of course, no, it's exciting to be able to talk about kind of like what the therapy experience is and make it more familiar for people that are kind of like, ooh, like how do I get those first steps going and everything like that? Because it's a really important process of like how do I find the right person? I've spoken to a lot of clients that, have had bad experience with therapists and it's turned them off the whole therapy process for a really long time, because they had that one bad experience, right? And so if you have more information from the get-go of, hey, this is what really works for me and this is what I'm looking for, it's really going to get you a lot closer to having that good therapy experience so that you can really fulfill your goal, right? Client therapist fit is one of the most important factors for change.
For sure. In fact, research shows, right, that the relationship between the client and therapist is one of the strongest predictors of successful therapeutic outcomes. I'd like to start off by acknowledging, too, that when clients start this process of how do I find a therapist, right? And where do I look? Like the fact that they are actually initiating that action and looking for how can I establish services to make some changes in my life. I like to acknowledge that, hey, the fact that you are picking up the phone or writing the email, right, and initiating that process is like a huge starting point.
Yeah, and it can be really overwhelming find like looking for therapists and stuff like that. There's a lot of like information out there, especially now. So yeah, it can be pretty overwhelming and stuff like that. And yeah, there's several factors to
Hmm.
consider, right? Like I guess the first one would be is like, are you prioritizing finding a therapist through insurance? Or are you like, because that really does limit your options to your specific insurance carrier? Or are you saying, you know what, like the fit is really important for me. I really need to find someone that understands me and understands the problems that I'm working with. And that might be worth, like, again, like how I talked about before, like it's that commitment and stuff like that. And that might be worth like finding an insurance that a therapist that is not through insurance.
Yeah, that's a good point. And something else to consider too is, hey, do they want in person or telehealth, right? Because some therapists, like myself, are strictly online.
Yeah, that's definitely another very important factor to consider, right? So if you're kind of looking at the flow chart of things, right, it's like, okay, which one is it? Like with insurance, I'm limiting my choices a little bit more, but it's, they can still get therapy. It depends. It depends on the insurance plan that you have and everything like that. Different insurances pay therapists at different rates. So that's also going to affect kind of like the quality of people that you might have, or who knows, right? Or do I just want to have really like the options open, really find that like one person that's going to understand me and go for it and stuff like that, right? So like that's the flow chart. Then when you do that, then you can go into the next flow chart state, which is like, okay, like what's important for me, like telehealth or in person, right? Um, telehealth is really, really great because it adds so much flexibility to your life, right? It really, really has changed the therapy game. I mean, it was a thing before the pandemic, but it really, really changed the game during
Yeah,
the
we talked about that last episode too, right? Where the telehealth seemed to just kind of explode out to the field uh, after or during COVID.
Yeah, yeah, really providing that accessibility to everyone and stuff like that. And yeah, because like you could technically, if you're doing private pay and everything like that, like your therapist could be in, Southern California and you can be from Northern California and you could still see each other, right? And it really, really does help that like that fit piece, right? Because your options just become a lot bigger. If you're going the insurance route, it limits it more because it is much more dependent on where you live and what your insurance covers. But if you're doing the private pay route, it really does kind of like open things up more to like the choices that you can make, right? So you kind of want to think about that, right? You want like what is your lifestyle and everything like that. But yeah, so you want to think about what your lifestyle is. If your lifestyle is one where, you're always around other people, it's really, really hard for you to find a stable and like enclosed space.
Yeah, and confidential too, right?
Right. Very, yeah, very, very important, confidential, right? If you're not the most technology savvy person, right, which I mean is totally, totally understandable. Technology kind of changes so often and everything like that. And sometimes it's hard to keep up. So, and then the other thing is just kind of like, in person, right? It does provide this refuge from the chaos of life, right? It really helps set up the container of the space.
Yeah, I liken it to the gym in that some people need a place to go in order to get out of the house, in order to right, engage in that activity or feel more fruitful in engaging in that activity. Um, Considering that that hey, especially if they're home more frequently, right, and they want to be able to get out of the house, right, this of having in-person sessions would afford them that uh, option or ability if they're able to, right, to go to for in-person
Really
sessions.
kind of have to think about like what do you need, right? Like what will kind of provide that best environment to be able to be vulnerable, to be able to be like, really look at yourself and that kind of thing, right? So it's again like, do you value like containment and separation, or do you value flexibility on things, right? And so that really influences your choice of like, okay, telehealth or in person, right? And look, like there might be a thing where like symptoms are really, really, they're telehealth technically is a lower level of care than in person, right? So your symptoms also really have to do with it, right? Like you get, I don't want to say like 80 to 90% of like your needs met in telehealth, right? But if you are a person that needs the full 100%, then yeah, you might need in person. So it is kind of like really looking at yourself and identifying your needs, and again asking yourself that question of like, where am I going to get the most support to be able to change and incorporate these changes in my life?
Yeah, there really is something to be said for in-person sessions. Even though I'm fully remote, part of me does wish, right, that oh man, there'd be so much more added quality right to the service if I were able to have in-person sessions. Um, and certainly when we think about like telehealth, like appropriateness versus inappropriateness, right, for kids, some kids just aren't appropriate for telehealth. And so, uh, whenever I'm working with children too, I have to be thinking about that and assessing that. And but clients will often say, "Oh man, like how I wish we could meet in person," right? So even part of them too wishes that. uh, feels like there might be this added benefit of in-person services.
Definitely, definitely. Because I mean, like humans are like sensory context creatures, right? Like we use our not just our sight, but smell, taste, touch, right? We get so much more information on things when we're in person, and sometimes by having more context of where we learn things, it provides us more of that base to put those changes into like in into the world, right? But like again, with the telehealth stuff, like I've had clients where, I mean, I also have I have a 99% uh whole like telehealth practice, right? um but so I have clients that they're on their break from work, and like they have the session and everything like that in their car, and it really really works for them, right? So it's just one of those things of like, you know, again, asking yourself what you need.
Yeah, and part of identifying what the need is for the client to think about, well, what are my goals? Right. So that makes me curious about like how can someone who's seeking a good client therapist fit, right? How can they incorporate their needs and goals into that search?
Exactly, exactly, right? This is really where you start weeding out people and looking at the profiles and reading through them and that kind of thing, right? Like that's really what, if you go to this Psychology Today and everything like that, you're really going to look at like, okay, what are the specializations of the therapist, right? What are they trained on? What is their background in, right? And it's really, that is really how you're going to like get that person that you can be close with connecting, right? So it's like, yeah, if your goal is, you want to reduce your anxiety, right? And you see a bio of like, oh yeah, well, I've done these training, these trainings in anxiety, or I've worked with people with anxiety with these many years, right? Like that's an important thing to know, because then you know that like, okay, so the person that I'm working with like has a background in this, has expertise in this, like I can feel comfortable trusting their judgment on some of these things, right? I always say that like the client is the expert in their own life, right? The therapist is the expert in like what we've learned and what we the concepts and everything like that, right?
That's so interesting that you mentioned that because I was thinking right before hopping on to this call that the therapist is also always learning. And sometimes clients might think, they might come in and think, oh, well, that the therapist has all the answers, right? But this also goes back to what we were talking about earlier, in that the client is the expert in their own life and therefore has the solutions within themselves. And so we are here to guide and support them in that process. And the fact that that therapists are always learning alongside the client is important because each client's experience is unique.
Exactly. And that really helps kind of even out sometimes a lot of people feel weird about being in the therapeutic situation and stuff like that, because they might feel a power like differential and stuff like that, right? And I mean, it can be there, and that's really something to watch out for 100%, right? And that's something that therapists are also very trained in acknowledging and everything like that, right? But it's also really important to know of like, okay, the equal standing on things is just kind of like there's expertise on all levels here. And it's just about like the process of sharing these things and communicating these things, and that's how you guys go on the journey together.
Going on the journey together. I love that. As you were talking, it was starting to make me think about how the therapeutic space, right, how important it is for the client to feel safe in sessions. And I just know from my own background in seeking services, right, that I'm just ready to just sit down and like start talking, right? Let's go. But some people might need a little bit more time to come around, right? You develop that trust in the client therapist relationship, right? Another thing to kind of be mindful of, right? Creating that trust in that relationship, because it is just that, right? It is another relationship in the client's life. But say, for example, if they have an interest in art, right, and then they come across your profile and say, "Oh, she's trained in art therapy," right? So then that could assist in that good fit process that we were talking about.
This is the other piece of like finding the right fit for you is that I do think it's really important for clients to just have a very like just doing a quick Google search on like the different theories and modalities that are used in therapy. As a client, educating yourself in this because that's going to be really like how the therapist thinks about achieving, like helping you achieve the goals and helping you address problems and everything like that and how they're going to communicate with you, right? So yeah, like how you were mentioning, an art therapist is going to use art as the language, right? They're going to use art to like get those things out of you. An IFS therapist is going to, look at those parts and see kind of like, okay, like what, and use that language to kind of get things out of you, right? A CBT therapist is going to be more focused on like, okay, what are your thoughts and how do those relate to your actions and your feelings, right? So it's going to be really important to just, like just familiarize yourself really quickly, right? Just on the differences on these things and stuff. And then again, something to look on the bios of the therapists and stuff like that, because that's also really going to help you, right? Like see, okay, who am I going to vibe with? Who am I going to, like speak basically the same language with? Who is able to going to match me on that level?
You're giving away our future episode ideas here. Another thing I can't help but think of, right, when we're talking about clients looking for, therapy services and such, is what fears or concerns they might have as they're embarking upon that process.
It's more of like, okay, this is what I've gotten from these sources, right? Like let me bring my expertise of my life to like the expert in this and see where we arrive kind of thing, right? But so yeah, so there's that stigma. There's a lot of misinformation out there too, right? Which kind of can add like to the fears and everything like that. And I mean, there's also the thing that, like, as humans, we really, really don't like pain or discomfort, right? And what the process of therapy a lot of the time involves is, kind of looking at these things and stuff. I use a lot with my clients, like the junk drawer analogy. So we all have this like junk drawer in the corner where we just stuff things in it. And like, there's that point where like, oh no, it's like difficult to open and I don't even want to deal with opening it anymore because like it's just I'm just not gonna see it, right? But it's still there, right? But like what the process of therapy is like, no, 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 we're gonna go to that drawer, we're gonna open it, right? We're gonna empty everything out, right? There's gonna be a moment where it's all over like your kitchen and your floor, and it's gonna be like, oh my god, this is such a big mess, right? But then we're gonna go into it and decide, like, okay, what do you need to keep? What do you need to throw away? Like, what are those things like don't even belong to you? We're gonna like decide, okay, we're gonna put it back in the drawer, nice, organized, and have it shut smoothly and nicely, right? So I
Hmm.
use that analogy a lot with my clients because there is this fear of like, wait, like looking at the emotions. Oh my gosh, they're gonna like take over if I like, stop and like look at them and stuff. So that can be another fear sometimes too.
Oh yeah, there could be stuff that we're hanging on to that isn't even ours, right? Or something that was given to us and that we're still hanging on to it, right? In IFS terms, that would be considered kind of like legacy burdens, right? If you will. And that makes me think, kind of like we were talking about earlier, right? With some of the risks and benefits around telehealth, right? There are also risks and benefits for therapy in that sometimes, and as we're kind of going through the process, things might feel like they're getting worse before they get better.
Well, I mean, it's important that your therapist discloses that with you. Important that you feel safe enough with your therapist to be able to kind of like trust that like it's going to be okay, and that like there's still going to be that containment there.
So when we're talking about this idea around creating a safe environment for the client, right? That can look different for everyone, right? It's so subjective. But I'm just curious, what's something that would make creating a safe environment for you in the therapeutic space?
For me, like something that creates that that safety and stuff like that is like knowing that what I'm feeling like is okay and I don't need to justify it with anyone, right? Like I think it's really important that like feeling of like I can be myself with this person, and like I'm not gonna be judged by them, and like I can let that real self come out that in many other areas of my life that doesn't come out.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. It really lends itself to this idea of, when we're talking about clients' fears or concerns and expressing their authentic self in that therapeutic space. So I really appreciate you sharing that. And something that comes up for me when I think about what a safe space is that if the therapist might be like jumping to conclusions without having all the information yet, right? Like it's like one of my pet peeves. It's like, wait a minute, like don't jump to ideas, don't jump to conclusions yet, right? Like just kind of get some more information first.
Yeah, like that really needs to be respected because your life experiences are unique to you. And while, the therapist might have like, okay, they've worked with a lot of people before, they might know a lot of trends and stuff like that, like it is something that's like you're an individual, you're unique, and that conversation needs to be had with you, right? So, if something like it's a very different thing if a therapist is like, oh well, you have anxiety because of this and this and this, right? Like that's very different than if the therapist goes more like, okay, so you've told me this story, right? Like this is what I'm hearing, and this is what I'm hearing of how you're dealing with these things, right? Is that correct? Am I hearing everything correct, right? Like, okay, how do you feel? Like, what do you think about the fact that you might have anxiety? Right? It's a very different way of communicating, and it gives the client the power of just kind of like, oh, you know what? Like, yeah, like this is something that I'm dealing with and doing and everything like that. And I am reacting in this way. And even though and like it's more of just kind of like, yeah, like this reflection piece helps me realize
I'd
that.
like to go back to something that you referenced earlier, and that was the initial consult, right? Kind of, we know that kind of earlier on, like we were talking about, like talking about the, risks and benefits of uh, telehealth and therapy in general, right? But also, I was just curious, like, what do you think are some other things that clients can expect in like an initial consult and or like that first session?
Yeah, so an initial consult, like really, first of all, it's really important for the clients to know that they are able to end therapy like anytime that they choose, right? Like to know that just because I've started with this therapist, like it's not, and I don't feel comfortable, doesn't mean that like I have to keep going with this therapist, right? Like you're not going to hurt their feelings. Consult is really where you get a like your first interaction with the therapist, right? If you're doing private pay, what usually happens is that there is a 15-minute free consultation that is given to clients and stuff like that. So you can like do a little mini phone call about kind of like, and about what's going on, what you're hoping to get out of
And especially
therapy.
for private pay clients, right? Having that conversation around what the associated fee or rate is for services.
If you're doing private pay, there is a legal document called the good faith estimate, right? That you legally have to have, so that the expectations of how much the therapy is going to cost, right? And that needs to be given to you before treatment is started, or anytime there is a change in fees, right? So yeah, so it's really so like yeah, the initial consult is really for knowing like that you give the therapist like what you're looking for, right? You get to interact with the therapist a little bit and just see like first impressions, how do you feel, right? And then really it's like, okay, you figure out kind of like you figure out fee stuff, you figure out appointment times and availability, right? It's really yeah, so that's all kind of like in the first consult. If you decide to do the first session is very like assessment based and everything like that, right? But before that first session, you also get all of the informed consent documents. I mean, we have that two cancellation policy, and then we close out the case, right? That is not an uncommon thing with therapists, right? Like, because like I stated in the very beginning of things, right? Like, it to get the best results, it's all about consistency, right? Um, and it's also like commitment. And if you're not giving, the time, like time is really valuable. Time is a very, very valuable resource. And the therapist is giving you that time, right? So if it's not respected, then, there needs to be an adjustment to that. All of that information is going to be given to you like before the first session, right? Which can be overwhelming, right? As a client, it can be like, oh boy, there is a lot of information being thrown at me. Like, what do I need to retain or not? And so, like, the therapist will review this over with you several times, right? Like, you have to give your consent for treatment to start, right? And you can remove your consent at any time you choose. So that's something that's really important to know about. That's something that a lot of clients don't know, and they feel very obligated sometimes of kind of like, oh, like, and then what happens is that rather than having like a conversation with the therapist of like, hey, I don't feel that this is the right fit for me and everything like that, what they do is they just don't show up to appointments, right? And that really, really creates this, like spiraling issue and stuff like that, where client is not really, they're not getting forward in their treatment. They have this bad taste in their mouth of what therapy is, right? And on the therapist end, it doesn't give them that opportunity to grow and to realize, like, and to learn, like how you were talking about. Like, we're always a therapist, we're always learning too.
Yeah, and I like to afford clients that opportunity to be able to, right, speak up and communicate if things aren't kind of going as expected on their end, right, or certain needs aren't being met. I like to afford them that possibility to be able to talk about that when they need to. Uh, and in fact, uh, I find it important, kind of as we're talking about earlier on, right? As when now we're kind of venturing on into like these earlier sessions, right? Just keep on touching base with the client, like, hey, how are things going, right? And keeping those lines of communication open. Uh, and sometimes, right, who knows, even further down the road, right, some of the concerns clients might have when they're coming into therapy, right, is like, do I have to do this forever, right? And so, in fact, sometimes the point does come, right, where, as it said, and we heard it said in Izzo rooms, right, sometimes we get to deliver the good news, right, that hey, seems like you're ready to just go and fly. So those times also happen for
I always
clients too.
make the joke that therapist is the only job where like we're trying to talk ourselves out of a job.
Yeah, I have a personal training background, and it was basically the same thing, right? It was like, oh, you're feeling kind of stuck or needing more information about kind of this particular part of your life, right? It's like, well, here, let's kind of support you and guide you through that and give you some new information and go fly on your own. But it was always like still like in this spirit of supporting people. Something else to consider too when we're thinking about this idea of a good fit is culture. And that extends beyond just language and ethnicity, right? When we're talking about mental health, one of the important things to consider within the cultural realm is what does the client think about mental health, right? And therapy as a treatment, right? And so we want to take that into consideration. And, you could almost spend a whole episode on culture alone, right? But we're also thinking about the norms and the values and the belief systems and
Yeah,
all
yeah,
of
no,
that.
that's really really important because like again, we need to look as like yes, we're individuals and everything like that, but we need to look at an individual like in a very holistic way. And individuals are part of a culture. And it's not just the culture of like, where you're from and where your ancestry is from and stuff like that, but it's everything. It's like what you do for work and what like bigger systems you're a part of or everything like that, right? So like there's yeah, so there's that, and then there's religion, and there's ethnicity, language too, right? That's really important too. And so one of the things is like, okay, there are translator services that do like an amazing job at providing treatment with like for accessibility needs and stuff like that, right? But it's one of those things of like, okay, you asking yourself like, okay, is it worth like finding that work to find a therapist that speaks the same language as you, right? um it's like it's that's very very important. And while the research shows like the therapist doesn't need to have the exact same background.
Or celebrate the same customs or traditions, right, as the client. uh this is especially important though, right? Because if it is a if these practices are a regular uh part or a huge part of the client's life and the way that they are in the world, right, then it's important for us to know about these things as well. I'd also like to point out too that when we're talking about this kind of cultural aspect, right, when you talk about kind of, treating the client as a whole person or being with the client as a whole person, right, this culture aspect is part of the bios, is the social part of the biopsychosocial considerations that we take into the place when we're, conceptualizing client care.
Exactly. And are you as a client going to feel safe for exploring these deeper things about yourself with someone that has a little bit more of that understanding of that background, right? So that's also something important to like look for, just kind of like, like what like again, doesn't have to match up with everything, right? But do I get a sense that like this person will be able to see the whole self
So I
of me.
appreciate you joining in today, and we get to chance to talk about like, well, hey, if someone's seeking out therapy, right, like what are some things that they can consider, right? That could be anywhere from logistics such as uh, private pay versus insurance or telehealth versus in person, right? But also on a more personal level, like what is it that helps you feel safe in that therapeutic space? And at the end of the day, right, consent is in the client's hands, right? They're the ones that are seeking to initiate services. So they are the ones who can pause it whenever they feel like they need to. But I appreciate you joining as we talk about, like, as you say, right, a client's intro guide into therapy. So, as they explore into the therapeutic world, right, what are some things to think about? What are some things to consider? We certainly have a whole list of, ideas for future episodes ahead. So, hope all the listeners continue to stay tuned. And yeah, thanks again, Yael, for joining today.
Great. Well, thank you. It was really great being here with you and talking with you about that. And And yeah, thank you for having me.
Thanks for tuning in this week. Be sure to check out our next episode as we continue to explore more elements of your therapeutic journey.